The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program known as SNAP, which feeds 42 million Americans, has been used as a political pawn in the ongoing government shutdown. Just last week, 25 states and the District of Columbia successfully sued the Trump administration in a push to use contingency funds to pay for the program. Hello and welcome to USA Today's The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. In 1939, as the country sought its way out of the Great Depression, the U.S. Department of Agriculture implemented the first food stamp program. The original program spawned other pilot programs which have been revised through the years, but at their core, these programs remain a crucial safety net for some of the country's most vulnerable. Here to discuss some of the politics around the SNAP program and the effects on everyday Americans, I'm now joined by USA Today senior national reporter Sarah D. Wire. Sarah, it's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Sarah, first, tell me about the case and the rulings which came down on October 31st, just one day shy of the funding deadline.
So the case was brought by governors and attorney generals from 25 different states. And on Halloween, actually, day before they were supposed to go into effect, two different judges ruled that the federal government did have to provide these benefits, and they gave the Trump administration until November 3rd to come back with a plan, whether that was going to be partially funding or whether they were going to move money around in order to provide these benefits. At this point, it looks like about half of people's SNAP benefits will arrive. This is a process. It's going to take a couple of days. It's not going to be immediate. And in one of the cases, the Trump administration has not answered whether they're going to pay the rest of the benefit later in November. In both cases, the judges said that, the administration did have the authority to spend the money, something that they've said in the last few weeks that they didn't believe they had. They've also said that the Trump administration has the authority to move money from tariffs in order to fully fund SNAP benefits because of the wording in the SNAP law, which says that it will be provided, not that it shall be provided.
There's news out just on Monday with Trump weighing in on this. What did he say he'd do?
The biggest thing was that he said he wasn't planning on appealing it, that if he got the authority to spend his money, if the court said that he could, that he'd go forward with it. But he wanted the courts to explain what authority he had.
And Sarah, where does this leave states?
A lot of states had already said that they were going to try to help out in some ways. They were going to use their emergency funds or call back the state legislatures and try to do it. Maybe some of them are still going to put this money towards food banks, who have already seen a rush. But, at this point, the states have to figure out how to get the money onto the cards in order to get it to people.
And how much money does the USDA have in this contingency fund, and how long will it last if the government doesn't reopen soon?
So with the contingency fund, it actually has just under $6 billion in it. But the administration has said they will only spend about $5 billion, and SNAP benefits average out to be about $9 billion a month. So it's going to be about half what they need. There's not really going to be any money left in the contingency fund in December.
Recently, visitors to the USDA website SNAP page have been greeted with a message that says, in part, we're approaching an inflection point for Senate Democrats. They can continue to hold out for health care for illegal aliens and gender mutilation procedures, or reopen the government so mothers, babies, and the most vulnerable among us can receive critical nutrition assistance. Sarah, how did SNAP find its way into the epicenter of the government shutdown?
In 60 plus years that SNAP has existed, it's never ended up in the middle of a government shutdown. Politicians of both parties have always found a way to make sure that this food continues to get to people who need it. Even during Trump's first administration, when the government shutdown lasted over a month, people got the funds. When I talked to experts about what they were expecting, they all said, we expected at minimum that they would go ahead and fund this from the contingency fund to about half of what people were supposed to receive. Everyone was kind of flabbergasted that this was the route the administration took. I've heard from politicians on both sides that, they know this is an effort to push the opposing party to come back to the table and negotiate the end of a shutdown.
I want to better understand how SNAP works. Who's eligible for SNAP benefits? Who's getting it? And what are the benefits?
Every American qualifies. You do have to be an American. You can't be in the country illegally. You have to provide a social security number when you apply. Until this summer, certain people who were in the country legally but were not citizens did qualify. So that's, people who were applying for asylum or were here legally on other immigration reasons. But to qualify for the program, you have to earn less than the federal poverty level. And that's the biggest thing that stands apart. And the federal poverty level for a family of four is $32,000 a year. You have to prove that you are looking for work or that you are the primary caregiver for someone who is disabled or is below a certain age who is a child.
There's an additional note on the USDA site referencing pending changes to the SNAP work requirements and non-citizen eligibility. It says those changes are tied to President Donald Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act of 2025. What can you tell us about that?
So this summer, as part of that GOP tax and spending bill that was signed into law on the 4th, they did change who qualifies, and a lot of people are expected to fall off the SNAP rolls as a result. They more frequently have to prove that they are working or looking for work. People who have children of a certain age, who are teenagers, no longer qualify to stay home and get an exception. Anyone who's in the country legally but is not a U.S. citizen no longer qualifies at all. So asylum seekers or people who are here on visas no longer qualify. It is supposed to have a big impact. And a big part of this is the work requirement. People have to prove that they're working 60 hours a month in order to qualify. So people who maybe work side jobs or gig jobs are going to have a hard time proving that.
As you know, millions of Americans are facing increased food insecurity, even with SNAP benefits. What kind of demand are food banks currently grappling with? Have those who've been running these banks told you about what they're facing?
I spoke to food banks across the country, and obviously they're seeing an uptick because of federal workers who've now gone more than a month without a paycheck. Military families have historically used SNAP benefits. But to a T, it really stood out to me that food banks said they are operating at levels that they did during the pandemic. So overall, the amount of Americans who are using food banks has increased.
And you've been able to speak with SNAP recipients. What have they shared with you?
A lot of them have said their biggest concern is that they don't have a cushion. One mother said to me that she's on the brink of an eviction. She's got 4 children to feed. She normally gives money to her parents, and she doesn't have them to go to ask, to help her feed her children. And she said she's going to try to get a second job. She's going to do whatever it takes to make sure she can feed her children.
And what can you tell me about WIC? What is that program, and is it also funded by the USDA?
So Women, Infant, and Children is a program that's designed mostly for mothers of very young children, so infants and toddlers. It provides money for formula and fresh fruits and vegetables for women really soon after they give birth. And that program is paid for by USDA. When the shutdown began in October, the federal government was able to move money over from the tariffs to continue funding WIC through that month. It hasn't been confirmed yet whether that's going to continue on in November. And there's a lot of parents who are very worried, but it hasn't been said one way or the other at this point.
So we know that on one side of the equation are the individuals who receive food assistance. What can you tell us about some of the corporations and retailers and how they benefit?
For grocery stores, we know that SNAP spending can be about 8 to 12% of what they bring in a month. And for grocery stores that are on really close spending, that can be the difference between staying open and staying closed. And some of these grocery stores are in communities that have no other access to fresh foods. And so, some of the experts I've spoken to are very concerned about how grocery stores might stay open during this.
Can you give us a sense of what poverty might look like in America without SNAP?
It's one thing to say that 42 million Americans are on SNAP, but it's a little different to say that 12% of Americans are on SNAP. That just kind of drives it home a little bit more. And those are just people who receive benefits from the government. Working or living at the federal poverty line is very difficult, $32,000 a year. And a lot of people rely on food banks who don't get SNAP because it's so much lower than what they make. 46% of SNAP recipients are children. The majority are disabled. These are all people who don't have other ways to get food.
Sarah, after speaking with food bank operators, with SNAP recipients, what would you like us to know or better understand about the SNAP program?
One mother I spoke to said that, she doesn't want to be on SNAP. It's not something she's proud of or ever aimed to do, but she's going to do what she can to feed her children. She's so grateful that this cushion is provided by taxpayers that's going to help her get back on her feet. She's trying hard. She was a college student. She's got 4 kids to take care of. She's got 2 jobs. She was trying so hard, and she was just grateful that Americans provide this resource. And she's very scared about what she's going to do with only 2/3 of the funding.
Sarah, thank you so much for being on The Excerpt.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.